you to stand for the prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in his council chambers for the betterment of our fellow citizens, lead us that we may do all things well. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Present.
Mr. Rickway?
Here.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Here.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Here.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Here.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Here.
And Mr. Schildmeyer.
Present.
Let the record show all 7 members are present. At this time, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for former council person, Mr. John Rice. Mr. Rice served back in the early 60s, but passed away a couple weeks ago, and I'd like to have a moment of silence for him, please. Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to dispense with the regular order of business to hear a presentation from Alloy Economic Development.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to dispense with the regular order of business.
Second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to dispense with the regular order of business. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
So this evening, we're fortunate enough to have Catherine Fitzgerald, who's Vice President, Daniel Ferguson, Senior Economic Development Specialist, who some of you may already be familiar with from Alloy Development, formerly HCDC, to make a presentation to us regarding the services that they provide. So we'll go ahead and open the microphone to them.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Fitzgerald, Vice President at Alloy Development. I'd like to give a quick overview of who we are. We are actually we recently changed our name. We were formerly, and many people know us as Hamilton County Development Company. We recently did a rebranding into Alloy Development. In terms of the company, we offer 3 lines of business or 3 lines of service. Our commercial capital division does small business lending, primarily fixed asset financing lending through the U.S. Small Business Administration, and we've been doing that for over 30 years. Our second department, and one that generally people usually hear about us regarding, is our business incubator or growth lab. We have about 50 tenants in the 2 buildings on Mentor Avenue in Norwood, startups that we assist with growth. And then finally, the last department is Economic Development Services, which Dan and I are both a part of. We contract with Hamilton County, so we are their Economic Development Office, but we are not county employees. We are a private nonprofit, and we've been doing that for quite a few years. Ohio Revised Code permits that. So we work throughout Hamilton County, generally not in the city of Cincinnati, though they have their own staff and team, and in my former life I worked for the city, so we partner really well with them. In terms of the services that we provide, and we do, our sweet spot is communities. We provide broad economic development services throughout Hamilton County, but for communities that don't have their own economic development staff, a handful of communities, we do provide economic development services, much like what we're talking about proposing here tonight. The services include general economic development assistance, so that means marketing the village to developers, realtors, and also companies looking for a new home for their business. We act as a resource to the CIC or any business groups in the community. We also inventory available storefronts and lots and properties, keep an inventory of that for when people are looking for sites and storefronts. And then we also research and apply for grants on behalf of communities. And I'm going to let Dan talk about some of the other services that we provide, and then we'll answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. So Dan Ferguson, I kind of wanted to point out real quick before we delve a little bit more into the scope of services that the contracts are highly tailored really to the needs of the local community. and that we really just try to bolster your existing efforts and complement your existing team. So we don't operate in a vacuum. There's not one solution that fits every community. And to some degree, usually the first year of a contract, it's kind of academic. It's a lot of information, it's a lot of questioning, it's a lot of discussions, it's a lot of us learning a little bit more about your community and kind of how you want things to work going forward. So having said that, I'll go ahead and dig a little bit more into the scope of services. So Catherine talked about the general economic development assistance. I'll go a little bit into the attraction of new businesses and investors. So we work with a lot of the area realtors. They provide us with the company requests for sites and buildings. So the more we know about areas and what things are coming available. I don't know if you're aware, but right now, vacancy in commercial industrial, it's super low. There's just not a whole lot out there. So you really have to get creative with kind of finding new spaces, new opportunities. Another thing we do is we meet with local developers. So we'll go to Darren Hall and we'll say, okay, what's your perspective on these few key sites, and just try to get a little bit of insight from them. We often create a marketing brochure for the community. So when we go and we meet with prospective investors or companies or even companies here in the community, we have something to give them that says, here's St. Bernard, here's the people to contact, here are all the assets of the community. A lot of times the businesses, they're not so familiar with the area. They don't know the best place to go and eat. They don't know all the parks that are in the community. They're not, they're not as acquainted as they could be with the area. Catherine kind of mentioned inventorying of things. We do create maps. I'm a huge map guy. I love visuals. So we try to keep maps up to date of all the available sites and buildings that are in the community, and any of the current projects that are happening or anything that's exciting. We also try to identify underutilized properties. So properties that might not be for sale right now, but there's not a whole lot going on there. Or there's a site where they park a couple school buses, and that's it. That for urban communities, it's really important to make the most of what you've got. You're landlocked. You're not going to go and start annexing property all over the place. So you have to make the most of what you've got. And so the more we know about that, the more staff knows about it, the better. We often seek public-private partnerships. You can't expect government to do everything, and at the same time, you can't expect private investors to do everything either. There's a lot of wiggle room that we usually try to investigate. And we also address redevelopment challenges, basically barriers that lessen investors' interest in an area. I guess the simplest way to say it is de-risking, that you need to de-risk sites or buildings or situations. We get involved with that a lot. So that's attraction of new businesses and investors. The next section is business retention and expansion. Maybe as people know, this is really the bulk of growth. This is really where most things happen, is with your existing companies. We can put effort into attracting new companies, but it's really your existing companies that make the biggest difference in the community and where most of the job creation and growth is going to come from. And also for most municipalities, most of your revenue comes from the commercial, industrial jobs that are in that community. So that tends to be our focus. I mean, we'll deal with retail. I mean, there's retail on Vine Street, and that's important. Quality of life issues, amenities. Workers are very interested in that. Companies are very interested in that. But we focus on that commercial industrial portion. Let's see. So with business retention and expansion, we prioritize having one-to-one meetings with the companies. We invite staff along as well. But it's really important to get in front of those decision makers and understand their situation. At the same time, it's an opportunity for the community to kind of present their perspective, and also just anything that they're working on, any struggles they have. You definitely want to have a feeling of corporate citizenship in the community, that there's a connection there, and find any competitive advantages for those companies. They're located in St. Bernard for a reason. Let's make sure that we're aware of what the strengths are of the community and also maybe of the challenges that maybe we can address. And also, it's a chance really to get in front of the communities, do some relationship building before there are difficulties, so that they're a little bit more comfortable and, it's not just the company calling to complain about something. So the next section is economic development incentives, assistance. So we assist with the administration. This is the last part, third part, and I'm done. This is the administration of incentive programs. We'd be reviewing your past local incentives, your policies, your plans, strategies, maybe suggesting new strategies, maybe saying there's new state law that allows you to do things a little bit differently. We work with a lot of companies, we work with a lot of communities, and it's really helpful to understand, what other avenues communities have gone down, and it's either worked or not worked, and for what reasons. So one of the things we would do is suggesting new strategies that maybe other people have tried. There's a lot of incentives that are not local incentives, that are outside of the community, that are at the federal level, the state level, the county level, or their agency kind of grants through ODOT, EPA. All these things are kind of in a world of motion. So we try to keep up with those kind of resources, and probably in other communities where we do these contracts, half of the suggestions are to the communities themselves, that the municipality is the only one who's actually eligible to apply for these grants and these resources. In other situations, it's only the company that's eligible for it. And in some cases, you have to have both of them. You have to have that public-private partnership in place already in order to be eligible. And so we just try to keep our eyes on those things and look for the opportunities for the community, for the companies here as well. I think that's about it for me.
Any questions that we can answer?
Could you expound a little bit on, I guess, what your organization does as far as for Hamilton County?
Sure. So we do provide limited economic development services throughout Hamilton County. So we do administer, for example, the Enterprise Zone program throughout the county. We will meet with the company, assess the incentive, and process the incentive that will go to the state. We do the annual monitoring for that. We respond to requests from companies looking in the region. We have a database of available sites and whatnot. So the way I would describe the difference is we work throughout the county, but I think with the community contracts, we are more the feet on the ground a little more proactively, rather than kind of reacting to what might be going on. So it's just a little more feet on the ground day to day with a community contract, but we do work throughout the county, and we always say we're not going anywhere. So even for contracts that for whatever reason we part ways, we leave communities in good shape, and we're always there as a resource no matter what, because again, we're not going anywhere. And that's our mission, to help communities and businesses throughout the county. So.
Mr. President,
Ms. Halsell.
this might be a silly thing, but what gives, if you're working for other communities and then we hire you to work for us, what gives us the upper hand? And I won't say the upper hand, I don't know what the correct terminology is, but why would you, I guess what I'm trying to say, why would you push for St. Bernard if you're also pushing for other communities?
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yes, that's a very common question, because economic development is viewed as something very competitive. Mm-hmm. So, your neighboring communities are your competition. But what we've really found is that the unique attributes of the communities are so different that we can serve a number of communities in different capacities. But if we did have a lead and 2 communities in Hamilton County, they have to meet the general requirements of what the business is looking for example, we would submit both those sites, and we'd be open about that. The other thing we're very open about is if there's a business in a community that is outgrowing their facility and they're landlocked, for example, the first place we go is to the community that the business is in, to discuss that and look for alternatives. So we really discourage stealing companies from other communities. And in theory, it sounds like that would be something that would happen, but it's so expensive for a company to move. So I guess in response to your question, we really look at the unique attributes of the community, and that usually differentiates them anyway, and that's how we handle that.
If I could add something.
Yeah,
really
go
quick.
right ahead.
So, we're not necessarily decision makers. A lot of times it's the companies that make the decisions, right? And the more information you can give them, generally the better. And so we have general knowledge on all of Hamilton County. When we have contracts in those communities, we tend to have more knowledge on that community. And some communities, I think we mentioned this before, they have full-time economic development staff, and we're in contact with them, and we rely on those folks to have that information ready to go. And that's what a lot of this is about, is being prepared when the opportunities come. Because sometimes it takes a while, and again, the more information you can give them, the better you usually are positioned. It's when you aren't able to respond to an opportunity, it's too late, you know? So a lot of this is preparing for those things to come.
Mr. President,
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
just expand a little bit more on, you know, I know it's got a contract in here, but what are some of the deliverables that you've done for other or other municipalities? You know, what would the, you know, expectation be going into this agreement of, you know, the deliverables to the village of St. Bernard?
Sure. So I mentioned the brochure, the marketing brochure, mapping the sites. We'll basically have an inventory of everything that's available in the community. Really, we probably could even do an inventory of everything that exists in the community, but that tends to be overwhelming. These specific BR&E meetings, there's usually an annual report at the end of the year that goes through that. With your incentives, you know, there's certain reporting that you have to do to the state that's due. I mean, that's not necessarily a deliverable to the community, but that goes to the state. Your TIRC, you know, there's records of those meetings. I mean, we could share with you, usually there's quarterly reports or annual reports that come out. It really depends on what you guys are interested in seeing, you know.
So Dan, let me just-
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I just want to give you a few, because those are, yes, things that we do deliver on, but to give you a couple of examples, for example, we have a contract with the city of Norwood, and I'm working on that contract now. Number one, economic development does take time. Properties don't turn around right away, but a few examples would be, we worked with a private owner on the Quality Inn site. That went for public auction. We worked with the port on that. They were a registered bidder to bid on the property. They worked with the city of Norwood on what their maximum would be essentially to bid on the property, because it's so important. It's right on Montgomery Road and what they consider to be the entryway into their community. They were outbid, but with our advice, the mayor contacted, because I had already contacted local developers who all said no thank you, basically. So he really, at the CEO level, contacted some local developers that he had a relationship with to tell them how important this site was. And sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes we have to come to the community and say, you know, we need the mayor at the table. The business expects that, for example. And in this case, PLK did purchase the property. They're also the developer for Factory 52. Another so we're very excited about that, because frankly, we had some not so great uses interested in the site. And as long as it complied with zoning, it was privately owned. There wasn't much we could do about that. Another example would be the former Perry and Derrick Paint site on Highland Avenue in Norwood. Sometimes it's a good thing when businesses don't pay their property taxes, because we can involve the land bank, which is what we did. We went downtown. Again, asked the mayor to join us, and we met with the leadership team at the port. They did acquire the property. They're really staffed for problem sites, so they immediately secured the site, did some cleanup on the site. We worked with the city to secure a grant through Hamilton County to do some spot demolition. So, you know, and it's going to take time. We probably won't have an end user maybe for a year or longer. Will the site be ready? But those are kind of some specifics. And Dan, if you'd like to hear a few of the things he's done in Laughlin or Woodlawn, he's been there longer than I've been in Norwood.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickwick.
just one little thing to add to that, Mr. Culberson, is I met with the head of the Center of Local Government, and he pretty much told me, and I agree with him, we don't have any representation. He's like, your community has nobody out there going to Hamilton County meetings or representing your community, anybody going for economic development, nobody marketing. He's like, you're your own little island there. And him and I had discussed that even before, I didn't even know the mayor was doing anything. He just happened to come in for my yearly visit, and we were discussing some downfalls to St. Bernard, and he said that's one of our biggest one. We do not have any outside representation. We kind of just stick to ourselves.
Mr. President.
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
Jonathan, do we talk about having a marketing or a developing person? I thought we put that in the budget, or maybe it was just preliminary talks and.
Mr. President, that is correct. That position was not obviously filled this year. As far as what is being pursued, obviously, for the future, trying to get a change in some administration within City Hall, which doesn't mean that that individual would exclusively be representing the village on economic development matters. But based on working with Alloy, even on an existing expansion project within, the community itself on the industrial side, already realizing what they could be able to do on a potential contractual basis, representing us again at the table in Hamilton County, makes sense almost more so than having someone exactly in-house itself. Also, just having the advantage of gaining a team and not just an individual would, in my mind, work in a much better, put us in a better position at this point. And again, it's not a situation that has to be forever. I mean, even though it could be, but as far as if it didn't work, okay. But again, they're already working with, various community organizations and, the relationship they have with the port. And of course, obviously with Hamilton County would be to our advantage. So I would like to actually, work with, if possible, with them in this type of capacity.
Mr. President,
Mr. Schulmeyer.
do you guys do some kind of like monthly communication, or how do we, how do we hear what you're doing every month?
We do leave that up to the community. We like to do quarterly reports. We prefer that. But we are amenable to what the community, preference is. I will say I report more frequently in Norwood, but it's just by way of email summary. So, but generally we do quarterly reports. We are open to doing something more frequently, if necessary.
And Mr. President, one thing I'd like to also point out that, a lot of the primary communication that we have, with our local industrial partners, comes, from the tax administrator. And not that I have any issue with the tax administrator obviously making contact, but we, in meetings that I've had with local industrial partners, that is one thing that we are lacking in. And for us, one of the biggest concerns is not all expansion, but retention. And a lot of times we don't know, what's happening, if there's a shift in production or if there's a potential for, closing a production line or anything. This allows us to have a foot in the door and act as having a liaison for the village and being able to have a team that would be able to communicate. So again, not there's any issue with the tax administrator calling them, but it's still nice to have someone representing us in a different capacity that we might be able to, find out more about potential expansion opportunities and that sort of thing. And working with them on, another current project has actually been very eye-opening as well, as far as for, what they facilitate through Hamilton County for the enterprise zones and that sort of thing. So I think it's a good opportunity.
Mr. President? Oh. Mr. President?
Ms. Bettinghouse.
Is usually the terms of an agreement like this a year? Do we usually yearly?
Yes, we do. We always have a 30-day termination clause in the agreements as well.
Ms. Brickwick.
I just wanted to elaborate on something that the mayor said, and Mr. Culberson. We did have it in the budget for $80,000, and that was just the minimum salary. So this one just in particular, $30,000, you're going to be saving a lot of money and all the benefits. So at this point, I think you would be saving money doing this as a startup, because I think part of the mayor's wishes, or if we ever get the charter changed, your village administrator would handle part of this. So in that way, for that person, you're not having a second person with benefits doing kind of the same thing. So I think if you look at hiring a consultant, which is what I kind of call it, it's almost a win-win as we develop onto our form of government.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
I've been up here 14 years. We've been talking about economic developer for at least 12 of those years. I think it's time we do it.
I have it placed on the committee of the whole. I would assume that we need an ordinance for this, or if we don't, somebody tell me, but otherwise I'll place it on the committee of the whole to be discussed and passed. Okay. Yes.
Mr.
okay.
President, yes, we need an ordinance.
That's kind of what I figured.
All
so
prepared.
I have it already under the mayor for next committee of the whole. Any other questions from anyone?
Mr.
Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Very much so.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickwick.
I would like to ask a question. Apparently, it's been being looked into about the $30,000, and instead of blindsiding somebody at a meeting, I think we should go ahead and discuss this, because apparently it's been on the mind and for 2 weeks, and I don't understand why people don't call City Hall and talk to the correct person and let's get this cleared up. So I don't want to see us put it off another 2 weeks and then get blindsided. So I know, and the reason I know this is Valerie was looking into it, and so I inquired, where's this coming from? So do you want to tell them what you found in regards to this?
Well, yes, I was just, question had been asked about, do we need to send this out for bidding? And my research says, I don't think so. I'm looking at our ordinance, which requires that all expenditures in excess of $25,000 require approval by council. That's what that says. It doesn't actually say competitive bidding. So because we don't have something that I could find that addresses that, and I ran, it's not like in the old days where you would pull out a book, everything's on the computer now pretty much. So I ran lots of searches. I didn't see anything that directed me about competitive bidding per se. As I said, we have their expenditure ordinance, but that's a different thing. So with that in mind, we then look at the Ohio Revised Code, and for villages without an administrator, the threshold for competitive bidding is $50,000, and that's ORC 731.14. So I think we're fine. The reason that we need an ordinance is just to okay the expenditure level, because it's $5,000 more than the authorized amount. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickwick.
and just my opinion, I brought this to council before, we're one of the very few communities with 25,000, and it's very confusing when the state of Ohio has one thing and we have another thing, and I think that's why people get confused. And I've suggested and asked council before that I recommend that you would do it the same as the state, because it is so confusing, when you're working, like, is that ours, is that the state, is that, you're constantly have to look things up. And it's not like we don't meet every 2 weeks, and I've never in my almost 20 years seen anything slide through. The administration, no matter who they were, brought things to council. I just think it would clean up our ordinances to match the state, since we're one of the very few that doesn't match. And once again, as I said, if anybody has any questions after a council meeting, I would suggest that council members contact anybody in the administration in that 2-week period instead of waiting 2 weeks. I feel like we could work better as a team if we all talk to each other more and work together instead of just trying to, I don't want to say blindside, but, do things only on TV. I think we need to work the other time that we're not on TV together. Thank you.
You'd like that placed on the committee of the whole to discuss that at committee of the whole? Consider it done. All right, once again, thank you guys very much for your presentation. Don't feel like you have to stay around for the, all right.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we'll go back to the regular order of business. Members of council, what is your pleasure on the reading of the last minutes of
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to suspend with the reading of the last minutes.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Housefeld to dispense with the reading of the last minutes. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. Members of council, are there any errors or corrections to the minutes as submitted? If not, the minutes will stand as submitted. Move to reports of city officials. Mayor, Mr. Stucci.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, we again had a presentation from Alloy Development, formerly, of course, HCDC, regarding providing services to us to represent the village on economic development matters, creating and maintaining jobs, promoting community growth, and improving the local economy. Again, I'd like to thank Catherine and Dan for coming this evening. The CIC met this Tuesday with representatives from Civitas Development Group and GBBN Architects, who made a presentation to the board on the progress that they're making on the proposed St. Bernard Square redevelopment project. They were able to show us renderings of the buildings with proposed exterior finishes, which have not been finalized. They also had layouts of the studio, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. ICRC had an issue with the streaming, so the entire meeting has been reposted to the village Facebook page. So I encourage you to watch that, where you're able to see the same exact presentation that was made to the board. Their presentation was in the last 15 minutes of the meeting, not that you wouldn't want to watch the entire hour, but this is exciting news for the village, and we'll update you once official renderings have been completed. Just a reminder, trick or treat in the village of St. Bernard will be on Monday, October 31st from 6 to 8 p.m. I'd also like to thank everyone who participated in the Halloween campout and everyone who came to the community trick or treat and costume contest. It was another great event by our recreation department. Lastly, don't forget that Emmanuel United Church of Christ will be holding their Family Fall Festival this Sunday, October 30th from noon to 5 p.m. There will be kids games, pizza, snacks, beer, yes, I said beer, trick or treat, so wear your costumes, karaoke, singing and performance by Matt Armstrong, pumpkins, rock painting, belly up to the bar, and more. So let's help make this community event a success. And thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Auditor, Ms. Brickwig.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I start with my official report, I'd like to add to the mayor's that the Big Speed's Coffee is going to be opening, I know, November 1st. They're having a soft opening tomorrow, but so for everybody, that's a new business coming to St. Bernard on November 1st. As part of my report is the Auditor's Office has prepared Ordinance 30-2022. This ordinance provides an additional appropriation of $729,751 into 0708, which is the equipment outlay where we've been saving money. I do recommend the passage of this. I think if we're going to be borrowing money for other projects, I'd rather see it be the long-term 0% road instead of our equipment. By paying up front, they have given us a discount of $19,636, and by locking it in, as the fire chief told us a few weeks ago, the prices keep going up. So I would like to recommend that they would, that council pass this, and it, just for the residents to know, is a 2025 E1 Cyclone Rescue / Pumper. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Director of Law, Ms. Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have prepared, and you have before you, ordinance number, I believe it's 32, yes, 3222, amending the St. Bernard Codified Ordinances, Section 121.10G, the Protocol, Policy, and Procedures Code section, and declaring an emergency. Well, that's just the title of it, but it deals with keeping the minutes and what the official minutes are, and how they can be made available for somebody who wants it in a hard copy of some sort, or by thumb drive or CD. And I would, we recommend the passage of that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Treasurer, Safety and Service Director, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. President. We encourage you to bag or can your leaves If you have an abundant amount, you may now put them out to the curb. We will vacuum them up. This is a service that is provided to you only during fall. We have made it to our slow season, and we have prepared for the winter care. To my community, remember when we were children and would spin around until we were dizzy? I don't know if the universe is playing tricks, but I believe that the earth seems to be revolving around the sun just a little quicker the older I get. However, that dizzy dancy feeling should not end with age. Live and love to the fullest. A note of wisdom: if you get that teenager in love lightheadedness when you stand up, it may be time to use a copay and seek out the root of the problem. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Tax Administrator, Ms. Helms.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a recap of September's tax report. Tax collections for September were $2,529,555. Year-to-date collections for 2022 are up 12.96%. Tax refunds for September were $29,153. Delinquent tax collected with capital recovery was $800. Delinquent tax collected with the Ohio Attorney General's office was $6,192, and taxes paid through the e-file portal were $256.72. That concludes my report.
Thank you. We'll move to reports of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Taberky.
No report.
Thank you. Safety, Mr. Brickway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight I have the monthly report for the fire department for September. I'll start with the fire incidents. We had 7 structure fires, 3 other fires. There were no vehicle fires. Auto accidents, 11. Hazmat incidents, 3. Service calls, 4. Fire alarms, 12. CO alarms, 2. And EMS assist, 12, for a total of 54 calls. On the fire side, mutual aid given, Norwood 13, and that is because of their ladder truck. Ladder 82 is out of service, so that's why that's high there. Elmwood was 2, Cincinnati 1, North College Hill 1, Lockland 1, Sharonville 1. As far as mutual aid received on the fire side, Norwood 1, Reading 1, Wyoming 1, Lockland 1, and Springfield Township 1. As far as the EMS incidents go, transports for the ambulance, they have 40 transports and 48 non-transports for a total of 88 calls. Mutual aid given, as far as EMS goes, Elmwood 5, Norwood 3, Lockland 1. Mutual aid received none, and Elmwood Place contract incidents, we had 3 for the month of September. Also, I'd like to report that the fire department has completed annual maintenance on Engine 91, Engine 291, Ladder 91, and Rescue 91. So that's good news there. All 3 units have completed confined space rescue refresher, and all 3 units have completed elevator rescue class. And that concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Service, Ms. Housefeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight I have the Service Department report for September 2022. There were 29 trucks placed at residence, 24 dumpsters placed at residence, 142 special pickups at residence, 174.24 tons of garbage taken to the landfill. As far as the recycling report, there was 25.66 tons of recycling material, 7,380 pounds of scrap metal. I also have the total waste collection fee for August 2022 was $26,352.39, and that was readmitted to the village. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Public improvements, Mr. Bob Culbertson.
New report.
Thank you. Laws, contracts, and claims, Ms. Bettinghouse.
I have no report.
Thank you. Marketing, Mr. Ray Culbertson.
Thanks, Mr. President. This year's Light Up St. Bernard will take place on Saturday, December 3rd, which is the same night as the village Christmas celebration. Please stop down to the rec department on the following days to pick up your free luminary kits. Sunday, November 13th from 2 to 6 p.m., Sunday, November 20th from 2 to 6 p.m., Sunday, November 27th from 2 to 6 p.m., and Thursday, December 1st from 6 to 8 p.m. And then lastly, I'd like to congratulate Miss Bettinghouse on her upcoming retirement from Children's Hospital. She's got 5 more work days left. Congrats. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Business and Industry, Mr. Schultmeyer.
Yeah, as was mentioned earlier, Mr. President, happy to be able to mention that Big B Coffee will be opening its doors starting November 1st for business. Their address is 4921 Vine Street, which is right next to Skyline. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole, Ms. Stegman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minutes were submitted on Tuesday, October 25th, and I have no communications.
Thank you very much. Clerk, if you could please give the first reading of ordinance number 29, 2022, then.
Ordinance number 29, 2022, authorizing and directing the mayor to execute the amendments to the VEBA Trust and VEBA Plan for the purpose of amending the plan coverage and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 29, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 29, 2022.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance 29, 2022. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 29? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Traberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Abstain.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
6 ayes, no nays, 1 abstention. Motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption of ordinance 29?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 29, 2022.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to adopt ordinance 29, 2022. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Traberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Abstain.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Abstain.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
5 ayes, no nays, 2 abstention. Motion carries. Ordinance number 29, 2022 is adopted as read. Clerk, could you please give the first reading of ordinance number 30, 2022?
Ordinance number 30, 2022, authorizing and directing the auditor to provide additional appropriations and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 30, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 30, 2022.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Ray Culbertson, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance 30, 2022. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 30? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Traberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 30, 2022.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Ray Culbertson, to adopt ordinance number 30, 2022. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Traberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 30, 2022 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 31, 2022?
Ordinance number 31, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the fire chief to enter into a contract with Vogelpool Fire Equipment, Inc. for the purchase of one 2025 E1 Cyclone Rescue Pumper and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance 31, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 31, 2022.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 31, 2022. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 31? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Traberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickwig?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 31, 2022.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Ray Culberson to adopt ordinance 31, 2022. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickway?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 31, 2022 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 32, 2022?
Ordinance number 32, 2022, amending the St. Bernard Codified Ordinances, Section 121.10G, the Protocol, Policy, and Procedures Code section, and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 32, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 32, 2022.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Hausfeld to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 32, 2022. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 32? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickway?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 32, 2022.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Hausfeld to adopt ordinance number 32, 2022. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Brickway?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culbertson?
Aye.
Ms. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culbertson?
Aye.
And Mr. Schulmeyer.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 32, 2022 is adopted as read. This time, does anyone on council have anything in our old business?
Mr. President,
Mayor?
well, actually, I'll just go ahead and take this in old. I have actually apologized. There were a couple items that I left out of my report, if you don't mind if I do that. All right. So I had failed to mention, we did swear in a new police officer, Mackenzie Recker, just recently. Mac comes to us from the village of Elmwood Place with several years of experience, so you may have already seen him on the streets, but we welcome him to the community. I had him ready for my submission for the newsletter coming up next week and failed to put him in this report, and I do apologize. But Mac is a great addition to the department, super young officer, and look forward to having him in the community. Also, I wanted to remind everyone that I'm hoping to, by Tuesday's deadline for the newsletter, to have the dates set for the community engagement opportunities for the proposed charter amendments. I was hoping to have those by this evening, but trying to get multiple people to be here on the proposed nights. We've been able to put together a potential schedule that could work for ICRC to be able to, actually be able to broadcast the meetings. So we're trying to work within that as well. And also, on Leanne's behalf, I'd like to put her on the agenda for the cow. So talking with Leanne and also the law director and Jerry Stoker, we've been discussing things in the past here regarding short-term rental program enforcement opportunities. So Leanne has been researching this extensively as well and been kind of following, some recent legislation. So I'd like to put her on the agenda. So she's got some extensive notes to share. So I hope that's all right, Leanne. Did you get that, Steve? Sorry. Thank you. Yes, correct. And thank you. That concludes what I missed on my report.
Not a problem. Better late than never.
Mr. President,
Ms. Hausfeld.
I have one question. I know in the past, when we ever hired, like a new police officer, a new fire person, we always brought them to council. Is there a reason why we don't do that anymore?
Mr. President.
Mayor.
Miss Hausfeld, I apologize. That kind of, when that happened, when we weren't really doing it during COVID, so we actually have a large group. So when we weren't really bringing people in, so we kind of need to do I'll go back and determine where we left off, but I didn't want to do it just for this one person or even in the last several months. We actually owe it to probably, yeah. So we'd like to try to do that, and I would like to work out maybe to have an evening where we could bring those individuals in, introduce them, and maybe have a brief reception or something, so we can try to, at least, I can go back and look between the police and fire to see where we left off, based on when we stopped doing it during COVID. So if we could have maybe an evening and we can schedule that and open that up to the community so they could actually meet some of these folks. So, and then try to start making that, after that point, maybe a common practice again to have them here at council.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Brickway.
it also saves us money, because if he can swear them in and get them right on duty instead of waiting for an official council meeting, we're saving. I like the way you're doing it, bringing them in here, so if we swear them in, they can get right on the streets instead of waiting a couple weeks and paying people over time to cover for them. I know he's not looking at it that way, but from my financial point of view, it does help a little bit that he swears them in ahead of time.
All right. Anyone else under old business? Does anyone on council have anything under new business? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council this evening? Please state your name and address for the record.
Nicole Klungel, 551 Church. So I'm really excited that you're considering a marketing person or corporation. But I'm wondering, after looking at this brochure, if you might be willing to ask for some of their sample marketing materials. Because I'm looking at this as not a professionally designed or printed brochure that they use to advertise their own company. And so it might be good just to see what they're using to advertise communities. I'm guessing it's better than this and they're just saving money, but it would be good to maybe check it out.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Mayor?
Just to let you know, I have seen some samples from other communities, and as soon as we can get some additional samples, I'd be glad to share those with you. But yeah, this was not meant to be, our final draft, but I'd be glad to share anything I can get with you.
Anyone else in the audience? All right. If not, the next committee of the whole will be Thursday, November 10th. Excuse me. And as a side note, there was a motion last week at the last committee of the whole, that the council meeting will be moved up to November 17th at 7 due to Thanksgiving. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Motion by Mr. Bob Culbertson, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered.